A while ago, I started noticing something that honestly didn't make much sense. Every time somebody asks where they should spend their combat points or CP points, the answer were usually the same. Divine repository, divine repository, divine repository. And for a long time, I kinda accept that. It feels logical. You spend your CP, you open rewards, you get progression. End of story. But then I start paying attention to some discussions from experienced players, and that's when I notice something strange. Some of the players who seems to care the most about efficiency weren't spending their CP there at all. Instead, they were talking about puppet rallies. And not just talking about them, they were actively recommending it. Which immediately made me wondering, if Divine Repository is good, why are some of the most efficient focused players avoided? And once I start digging into that question, I realized this isn't really the discussion about this isn't really a discussion about events, it's a discussion about something much bigger. It's about how players accidentally keep following advice that was correct months ago but isn't necessarily correct anymore. And I think a lot of us do this because once we hear something often enough, we stop questioning it. We just assume it's a true. It's something like when somebody say a same lie like 100 times, for some reason this lie become a true. But here's where the things get interesting. The argument wasn't that divine repository is bad. Nobody was saying that. The argument was that the puppet rallies might actually provide better value once your account reach a certain point. And that's a completely different conversation because now we're not asking which event is good, we're asking whether the event everybody recommend is actually the best option anymore. And those are very different questions. What surprised me was the answer depends heavily on something most players don't even think about it. And this is prestige. Early in the season, prestige matter. You need it. You are developing your account. And early, I mean, when the KVK start, you're going to basically need a prestige so you can go for your policy. So you're basically unlocking your policy and you're progressing. So naturally, events that give prestige feel valuable. But what happened later? What happened later when you already set it up your policy? What happened when prestige stopped being that things that is holding you back? That's where some experienced players start changing how they spend their CP. Because if prestige is no longer solving a problem, then its value starts dropping. And once that happens, the entire calculation changes. Suddenly, you're not comparing rewards. You're comparing bottlenecks. And that's a much smarter way to think about resource spending. Because resources aren't valuable by themselves. They're valuable because they solve problems. And if a reward isn't solving one of your current problems, then isn't it's actually its value might be a lot lower than you actually think. That's when I start asking a different question. Why are players saying puppet rallies are better? Because we also have our forts rallies. And the answer wasn't what I was expecting. The discussion wasn't really about the rallies itself. It was about theatris, which is funny because theatris have been one of of those resources that seems to disappear forever, especially for free to play players, especially for developed accounts, especially for players thinking long term. And some players were arguing that the puppy rallies provide such strong theater value that they outperform divine repository once prestige become less important. Now, whether you fully agree with that or not isn't even the interesting part. The interesting part is the mindset, because most players compare events by looking at what they join immediately. Experienced players often compare events by looking at what bottleneck they're solving 6 months later. And those are two approaches that can lead to completely different decisions. I think that's where many players get trapped. They look at the reward, veterans look at looking at constraints, and those aren't the same things. Then I notice another detail. The recommendation come with a condition. You need to hit around 80% participation on fort. That's a huge detail, because suddenly isn't this isn't universal advice anymore. This isn't one of those videos where I tell you everybody to do exactly the same thing. The value depends on the execution. If you're consistently getting strong value from those rallies, the math may work in your favor. If you're not, then the calculation change again. And that's something I think strategy players sometimes forget. The best strategy on paper is useless if you cannot realistically execute it. I've been made this mistake myself before. I've been copying an efficient strategy from a strong players and then wondering why results weren't matching the why my results are not matching their results. But the missing piece wasn't the strategy, the missing piece was the context. And the context changed everything. Then I noticed something even more interesting. The discussion wasn't about efficiency. It wasn't about only about efficiency. It was also about policy. And I think enough players talk about that. One suggestion was basically this: if your kingdom gets upset when you spend CP on a certain way, just spend enough to cover what you need for the season and move on. Which sounds funny at first, but it highlights something important. Resource decisions in Call of Dragons aren't always purely mathematical. Sometimes they're social, sometimes they're political, sometimes they're alliance driven. And that creates a completely different layer of strategy. Because now you're not only asking what are the best value, you're asking what's the best value that still works within my kingdom expectation. And what I mean by that is we also talk here for Brings of War. It's not only the divine repository when you go there. It's not only about going for the puppets, doing a rally over the puppets, or doing rallies over the forts. We also talk about Brink of War. And there is expectations there. There is a lance expectations there. And honestly, that's a much harder question because perfect efficiency and perfect diplomacy aren't always the same thing. Then I start thinking about why this discussion even exists. Why do so many players continue spending CP the same way season after season? And I think answer is surprisingly simple. Most of us never recalculate. We make a decision once, it works, and then we keep going it forever. Even after our accounts change, even after game update, even after resource bottleneck change, even after a new event appear, the strategy stays frozen when the account keep evolving. And eventually, those two things drift apart. What was optimal 6 months ago might not be optimal today. Because, but because the difference is obvious, we never question it. We just keep repeating the same habit. And that's why I think CP point discussion is actually much more valuable than it looks like, because it reminds us revisit assumptions, not just about the CP points, about everything: heroes, artifacts, um, pets, speed ups, migration plans, whatever it is. Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't walking to the wrong decision. Sometimes it's continuing to make a decision that used to be right. And honestly, I think that's exactly what happened with a lot of CP point spending discussions right now. Players aren't necessarily making a bad choice, they're making old choice. And those aren't always the same thing. So now I'm curious, have you ever spent your CP these days? Are you still prioritizing Divine Repository? Have you switched toward Puppet Rallies? Or have you found something else entirely that give better value for your account? Let me know in the comments, because the more I look into this topic, the more I think the real lesson isn't which event is best. The real lesson is the real lesson is that every time your account change, your priorities should probably change too. And I think a lot of players, including me, sometimes forget that. And I'm going to give you an example from the event. Here I did the event, and as you can see, I'm getting 12 theatri from this puppet. On top of that, I have a chance to get some minutes research. I may get, I may not. Also some good resources, also some experience, and also those chests. Now, why these chests are important? I'm going to open some of those chests just to show you what is inside. I have 83, and I can basically pick whatever hero I like. And Flint and Airless is giving percentage extra resources. So even if my Flint is awakened, I'm getting 83 Flint tokens. I can easily go here and basically scrap Flint, and I'm going to get 830 tokens. And with these 830 tokens, I can basically get like 4 or 5. I can get like 5 gold keys. And getting these gold keys is just going to give me some chance to, grab something good from here. And yeah, we get Emrys. Now, my Emrys is awakened, so I'm going to use Emrys tokens at the end of the season. So you get the idea. Just right now, some people are going to say Brink of War. I also save my CP points for Brink of War. But right now, some of the CP points. But right now, I think Puppets is way more valuable from the forts at the end of the day. If I go and check it out, some fort, here we have like level 11. I can get 12, but here is depending how much damage you do at this fort at the end of the day. And it's not that easy to be killed. Anyway, guys, that is for this video. Huge thank you to all channel members for supporting the channel. If you do like to support the channel as well, you can check out the join button below. Members get early access to videos, exclusive content, member shoutouts, and Warwords member can reach me out directly for strategy and account advices. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.